Rachel.
Hi, Brittany.
So I want to talk about a topic today that's going to sound like easy. Like, of course we know what this means, but I don't think we really do. So to jump off from that, I want to start with talking about what is science is the question I want to ask today. What is science? And I know in your head, you're probably thinking, oh, that's easy. Like that's the class you take in school, or that's, biology or chemistry. And all those answers are correct, but what is science? And I ask that because today a lot of politicians and experts weaponize that word against us. And there's science is only one thing. And if you don't agree with what I say experts in scare quotes because we'll get into that, what these certain scientists believe is science, then you're anti-science. That was a lot of science in one sentence. But
follow the science.
Follow the science. So I want to talk about that because I think science is turned into a weapon against us. I think we really saw that during COVID, where it was the science was changing every single day, but if we weren't following it, then we were bad. At one point, I think Fauci declared that he was science. It became its own. That was crazy. It became almost its own religion, and it got really crazy. Yeah. So the first thing I want to talk about is that science is in itself a question. Science is the study of why things are and how they are, right? And so science in itself is a question. And we know that because of what we call the scientific method. Do you remember this from school, Rachel?
I do, and we're working on this in homeschool too, the scientific method. But yeah, science is the study of how we know things. Really.
And why we know things. That's an important question. How do you know it? Why do you know it? What do you know? So as you're teaching your son about the scientific method, I'm just curious, where did you start? What was point A for you?
Well, he's doing an online course, so I'm not actively involved too much, and he's getting really high marks. But I mean, we start with a hypothesis. We start with a question. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We start with something that you want to know and what you might guess about it.
Yeah.
And then you proceed from there to test your hypothesis, to collect data, to consider alternative explanations and alternative hypotheses. You want to know if you could be wrong. You don't just want to cherry pick evidence that proves you right, because ultimately science is about wanting to know the truth. Mm-hmm. It's not like a debate where you want to prove a point. Like rhetoric is different than science.
It shouldn't be, right? You bring up a good point. It shouldn't be, but it's kind of turned into that these days.
Yeah, but when you're in like a debate class, you're studying how to debate, how to persuade. You can actually try to persuade people as an exercise to something that's wrong. You can take a viewpoint that you disagree with and build up a case towards that, even though it's wrong. Sometimes lawyers have to defend people that are guilty, but they want to give them a fair shake in the legal system. So, but I mean, science should be different than that. Science should be a quest for the truth, whichever way it leads.
And that quest is never ending, too, is a really important part of it. But I'll get to that in a minute. I want to go back a little bit of the scientific method. So, the first thing we do is we just kind of observe the world around us, which we're all doing all the time anyway, and kind of ask, why does that happen? So we look at Isaac Newton and the apple, right? Oh my goodness, for a second I was like, what? I said Isaac Newton, right? It would be so bad if I got that wrong.
Yes.
Where an apple falls from his head or onto his head and he goes, I wonder how that happened. Yeah, how did that come to? Why did that happen? And then we get all these great discoveries from that one question. But the thing is sometimes we have these questions and we find answers and they're not always right. If you look at medical stuff, especially, and back in the day, how doctors used to approach things with the scientific method, like, oh, why are people getting sick? Well, let's try this and let's try this. Some of the things they did were outrageously crazy, but they thought it worked then, right? And they thought the science was settled. Bleeding is what I was thinking.
Bloodletting. Yeah,
yes, bloodletting. So it used to be if you got sick, they were like, oh, it's fine. We'll just bleed the person. We'll bleed out the illness. We'll bleed out the sickness. and it'll be gone and they'll be better. And like it was killing people.
Yeah, they believed in the 4 humors, and your humors are out of balance. Like they had a whole reason why they thought this was going to work. And sometimes it seemed to, but maybe that's a coincidence, you know. Correlation is not always causation, or
which
proof
is
of
also
causation.
important, right? Because let's say there was some of that where it's like, okay, well, it worked. That's great. But then all these other people keep dying. Well, it takes somebody brave to stand up and say, hey, maybe that's not right. And let's retest some theories. And that used to be pretty commonplace. Now, all throughout history, the people who dared to stand up and say, let's reevaluate this are usually... It doesn't always go so well for them.
It does not always go well.
And it doesn't today either. But the whole point of science is to constantly be challenging your own beliefs and your own findings, right? You have to constantly look at something and say, did we get this right? Because, you know, this person died from bloodletting. You know, maybe we were wrong on this. And then doing the whole scientific method over and over again. And we've stopped doing that today. I say we, meaning like society.
Yeah.
I hope you and I, Rachel, have not stopped doing that. But we saw that during COVID.
Never. Yeah.
We saw that during COVID where the science was settled. The science was we needed to wear masks, and then we didn't need to wear masks, and then we did need to wear masks, and then it had to be 6 feet apart to social distance. And now we find out we just made up that number because we didn't really know is what they're saying. So yeah, Rachel, you had something to say?
Pulled from air, PFA, pulled from air. I have a sad story about a scientist. If somebody wants a project to study, just
love it.
And something to look into further. And it was a scientist, I think in the 1800s, maybe the 1700s, named Semmelweis. Have you heard of Semmelweis?
I have not.
Semmmelweis. We'll put it in the notes. But Semmelweis discovered basically the benefit of washing your hands.
And okay, I know the story, but I didn't know his name. Okay.
So, and I'm going to butcher this a little bit, but just from memory. So there was a lot of childbed fever, like a lot of women who had just given birth. They were dying and nobody knew why. And he discovered that the doctors were going from like cadavers, like people who had died, and examining them and doing autopsies. And they would go straight to a woman giving birth and help her without washing their hands. So they were bringing all of that gunk from like dead bodies and then immediately like, you know, touching women giving birth. And then somehow they were getting infections and dying. And can you believe that he introduced like, you know, you should wash your hands. You should like sanitize.
Which seems so commonplace today.
It seems so obvious. But at the time, he was ridiculed. Like they made him out to be a nutcase, and he kind of died penniless, and like the other physicians of his time had made a fool of him. But anyway, if somebody wants a good research project, like somebody to study more about Semmelweis. It's kind of a sad story, but I mean, he's a hero. Like, I mean, he saved a lot of lives, and he could have saved more if they had listened to him and taken him seriously.
Rachel, we might have to do a whole episode on him because that is fascinating. I didn't know that. But that is, it's these things. And there's a word called hubris. And I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, but it's almost kind of like the audacity. I always think of it kind of like as the audacity of like somebody who thinks they're so right and so important that the idea of even of anybody even questioning or fathoming that there could possibly be another way is outrageous, you know, and that's kind of this hubris. And that's how I think of our scientists now, especially our government scientists. I don't mean all scientists when I say that.
Not all. But it's funny how monetary interests and people's jobs,
which means money,
get in the way and create that kind of hubris, which is very akin to pride. And there's a quote that I really love. I think it's Sinclair, or is it Sinclair Lewis or Upton Sinclair?
I was going to say Upton Sinclair because I have a lot of negative things to say about Upton Sinclair, but that's for another day.
Yeah, and like not all of his stuff is great, but
sometimes good quotes.
He had a great quote. It is very, very difficult to get someone to understand something when their paycheck depends on them not understanding it.
That's
so
good.
I think about that
That's
a
really
lot.
good.
And
I think okay.
It makes
No,
a lot of people make sense. You know, it's like, you should know this. Why don't you know this? Why can't you listen to us? Why can't you hear what we're saying? And it's because, well, that person, that expert, you know, their livelihood, like their whole career depends on them not listening to certain voices. And it's so frustrating.
And when it's something as important as our health, you know, it's so much, it makes it so much more serious because COVID, there was just so much misinformation from the government scientists on what was science and what wasn't science. And it changed, but not in the way where we're talking about where it's good to question. It changed in a way of 1984, this book we talk about, or a lot we have in the past. There's kind of an ongoing theme in it where the government says, we've always been at war with, what is it, like Eastlandia? I haven't read it in so many years. I can't remember what they called the guy. Well, we've always been at war, meaning they say like, no, it's always been this way. Don't you remember? It's always been this way. And that's kind of how they gaslit us, as the term. I don't like that everybody uses that word now, but that's kind of what it was.
Apt. Yeah.
And so that is why I think it's so important to talk about what science is and what it isn't, because there are people that have a narrative, and there are people also that just don't want to believe that they could be wrong because there's this hubris of science. And we've seen that all throughout history, but I think our most latest example is definitely COVID. And as more comes out and we're learning more, we're realizing, okay, one, that wasn't true. And when we but when we put all the authority in one person, like one scientist saying that like you're the czar of COVID or you're the czar of science, that's very dangerous, because then you're saying one person has the say of what we all decide. And what if, like you said, what if in your story, what if the person in charge said, hand washing, that sounds ridiculous. And then
what
we were
a waste
all like,
of time.
what a waste of time. And where would we be? It would be terrible and disgusting. So
science is about questioning everything. Anyone that tells you can't question the science, you should understand that those are the real anti-scientists.
I was going to say, because a lot of times if you do question science these days, you get the like, well, that's anti-science. But in my opinion, there is nothing more anti-science than telling someone they can't question science. Because again, that is how we've gotten so many of the world's, greatest life-saving, like washing your hands, inventions, or even just standard practices. And back in the day, somebody, bloodletting probably did save someone's life, right? That didn't mean it didn't mean it worked for everybody. Didn't mean it was actually the best practice, but it took time. People had to question that. So, yeah.
I mean, and I think it's worth questioning, is there a circumstance under which bleeding could be helpful? I don't know. I'm going to question that.
There's an observation to question. I want to say that we are not asking anybody at home to go test on your brothers or sisters. Your siblings are not a science project.
Don't bleed. But I mean,
and don't stop washing your hands.
Now I'm curious, is there maybe a mechanism where that could be helpful in certain circumstances? Was there something to it at some point? I don't know. Yeah. I can question and I can dig a little deeper and see. But until then, I'm gonna. I will donate blood, but I will not bleed on purpose
to try to make yourself
get better.
No, we will leave it there. But again, I want to encourage you all to question everything, question the world around you, question what somebody else says about the world around you, because science is ever changing. So maybe go read about some of these scientists throughout time who were exiled, some of them even, or marginalized or criticized for daring to question the established science. Galileo. I mean, that could be another whole episode. And then they end up being vindicated later on, because there are many, let me tell you that. So we will leave it there. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast and share with your friends. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
See you later. Bye-bye.